Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Downton Abbey, the movie. Let's talk about it. So Downton Abbey is directed by Michael Engler, and full disclosure, I am not a fan of this series in the slightest. This film is not directed towards me. I apologize, but this is just not my jam. So this will definitely color my review. I'm putting it out there already. I'm only doing this review because as a British citizen, I feel like it is part of my civic duty. I'm already not a huge fan of tea. So I feel like I'm pushing the boundaries here a bit, and I had to make a concession somewhere. So I decided to review this film. It's the most British thing that has ever come from the UK, and I despise it. I've always thought that Downton Abbey was just a show about entitled aristocrats living their best lives off of inherited riches and the spoils of the glorious British Empire. That is just not my jam in the slightest. I had no interest in seeing that, and after seeing this film, I have to say that I was pretty much halfway there. So we're going to start off this review with the negatives of this film and hopefully end it off with a few positives, just so that we don't come out of this video in a bad mood. So without further ado, let's get into this review. So first things first, like I already mentioned, I did not feel sympathetic towards the characters in this film in the slightest, because half of this is of course about the struggles of the aristocratic family as they realise that the king and queen are coming to Downton Abbey for a visit. And on that side of the story, the members of the family are just impossible to relate to. I don't know how they could be likable to anyone. Like, oh no, I have to put up chairs in the rain. Oh no, we don't have enough fancy silver to show off to the king and queen. Oh no, the silver that we do have isn't polished enough, and oh no, the help is stealing from us. Oh no, absolutely no. Oh no. I just kept thinking, what the fudge am I watching right now? How did I get into this mess? I really dislike those characters. I really dislike them, especially when their trivial issues are juxtaposed against huge problems like homophobia in the turn of the 20th century and the backdrop of wars and terror of the British Empire. Like, but then it gets worse, because on the flip side to this are the worries of the staff members of Downton Abbey, and all they seem to be concerned about is how to best please their masters. It is mind-boggling to me. The entirety of the film, they just want to do well by their masters. They want to do well by the aristocracy. They want to serve the king and queen upon their visit to the manor. So much so that they hatched this crazy Looney Tunes plan to get the royal staff members out of the way so that they can present the dinner to the king and queen. And I get it on the one hand, because if you are really a royalist, I guess presenting yourself to the king and queen and serving them and providing them with food during their visit would be like a really big honor. Like, it would be a really big deal, and it is a big deal to not just the staff in Downton Abbey but also to the whole town. But for me, like, it was just baffling to see how their entire worlds revolved around their superiors. And this is obviously from the perspective of someone who doesn't watch the show, so I don't know their storylines, I don't know their personalities outside of this film. For me, all I was presented with is just people who are obsessed with serving. Now, there are a couple of characters who aren't royalists and present a bit of a different opinion on the royal visit. There is that woman who works in the kitchen who is engaged to the footman or the butler or something. I don't know any of these guys' names. I'm so sorry. There's this woman who is anti-royal, and she does make a few good points. She makes great points about why the monarchy isn't really the best thing for the country necessarily, especially at this time. But she's kind of brushed off as being like, oh, she's a radical, oh, she's crazy, like, let's not take her seriously. And it's the same thing for the Irishman, who turns out to be a widow, and I didn't realize this until like halfway through the film. I'm assuming that he had this kind of past where he was a bit of a rebel, a bit of a bad guy, and then he was tamed by the British countryside. It seems like that's the kind of story arc that he went through during the show, at least. And so here we're presented with a much more tame version of this character, who, by the way, really reminded me of Niall from One Direction. Like, the whole time I kept thinking, wow, that's like Niall's cousin or older brother or something. Anyway, I felt like the character that we were presented with here was much more tame. Even still, like, his anti-monarchist leanings were used against him throughout this film, so much so that he was presented as this potential king killer throughout the film. Like, it was hinted at that maybe he could be up to nefarious things. Like, What? No, just because he doesn't bow down to the king and queen, well, he does physically, but philosophically, perhaps he doesn't agree with the monarchy. It doesn't mean that he's inherently a terrible person. And speaking of the assassination attempt on the king, I thought it was really bizarre how throughout the majority of the film, you're kind of led to believe that the Irish guy may be up to no good, or the guy that at least approaches him might veer him towards the wrong direction, down a dark path. And that's just like crazy. Like, that's a huge plot twist that he actually wanted to kill the king. I just thought he wanted to throw a few tomatoes during the parade. Except after the attempted assassination actually happens, it seems to no longer matter. Like, no one brings it up really, apart from a wink and a nod at the end of the film. It's not really held with much severity, with much gravitas, which is crazy because it's like, it's an attempted assassination. Like, it's just kind of covered up and dusted under the rug. I just found it kind of weird how the Irish guy quickly forgot about it afterwards and then promptly fell in love with that secret daughter woman. I was not convinced by that romance in the slightest. It unfolded so quickly in front of my eyes that I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And then at the end of the film, they're just kind of dancing until sunrise, and you're supposed to feel like emphatic towards them and like, oh my god, yes, he's found true love. But it was just so hastily done that to me the relationship didn't work in the slightest. I actually found that the Irish guy had much more chemistry with the princess when he was talking to her in the garden. I felt that they kind of connected a bit more, although of course she is married. And speaking of the princess, I really did not like the resolution to this storyline either. I thought it was very bizarre how essentially throughout the entire film she's miserable in her marriage. Throughout the entirety of this film she's kind of miserable. Her husband doesn't really treat her well. He doesn't really acknowledge the children or want to spend any time with the family. And at the end of the day, the king and queen basically advise their daughter to just tough it out. She's basically just told to stick with it, even though it's very clear that she's not happy in this relationship. But because she's a princess, duty and all that comes first, so just tough it out, basically. And what really irked me as well is that at the end, she's talking with her husband and she says, no, we have to change. Both of us have to do something to make this marriage work. Both of us. What? It was entirely the husband's fault. Like, not even split 40-60. Like, it was 100% on the husband. He was horrible throughout the entire film. But even that storyline wasn't as bad, in my opinion, as the pregnant blonde and her husband. First of all, in the case of the pregnant blonde, I did not find her to be a compelling character in the slightest. What I will say about the rest of the cast is that at the very least, their performances are really good. Like, no one can say that the acting in this film, and presumably in this series because it's very highly regarded, is bad. Like, everyone's doing a great job acting except for this blonde girl. Like, this blonde girl really wasn't my favorite in the slightest. Like, she was just so snooty, but also very, she didn't have any charisma to her. I didn't like her performance whatsoever, and I didn't like her character whatsoever. So I had no sympathy towards her. And then of course the husband is invited by the king to join the prince on this kind of tour of the colonies in Africa or whatever, like, yay, British Empire. And the blonde woman doesn't want him to go because she's pregnant. She wants him to stay around for the birth of their first child, blah blah blah. You know what, no, I'm gonna persevere. I'm going to explain to you guys why it is that I hated this character so much. It's because throughout the whole film she's basically just complaining about her life and complaining about how this is not really the direction that she wanted for herself. And it's tough for me as a viewer who's never seen the series to relate to her because I don't know what she was like before. I don't know how great her life was before she got married. So for me, it's just her whinging and complaining about living a glorious life. Like, it just is so unrelatable to me. I really disliked, again, the portrayal of the character on top of that. And finally, you have the appearance of Matthew Goode here, who just shows up. I'm guessing he was in the TV show, so that's why, like, when he comes, it feels very much like a favorite character coming back. Like, you can really tell his role here is inconsequential. Fine, he's here to let's all dance. What I will say though is that for the first half of the film, I thought that the brunette and the Irish guy were married, and so I was surprised to see the Irish guy kind of fall in love with that secret daughter. But yeah, Matthew Goode is apparently the brunette's husband, so they had a dance together and that was fun. Alright, now that we have gone through the things that I didn't like about this film, let's tack on a few things that I did enjoy. First off, I think Maggie Smith Maggie Smith really made this film watchable for me. She's so funny, she's so witty, and her performance is great here. She really is like a shining star in this entire film. Her whole motivation throughout the film is to make sure that the inheritance from her cousin goes directly to her already wealthy son. So it's kind of like hard to root for her to win, but I think the performance that Maggie Smith gives here just kind of makes the character more likable just in the way that she's portrayed, in contrast to that blonde pregnant woman who does nothing to help the way that the character is written in her performance at all. Secondly, I wanted to give a shout out to the sets and the cinematography and the costumes. You know, I thought all of those aspects of the film are really beautifully done. It was a very beautiful film to look at, so at least while I was bored out of my mind, I had pretty pictures in front of me. So overall, I know I've crapped all over this film, but I really think that if you're a fan of Downton Abbey, the TV show, you will probably really enjoy this and find delight in it. I know a lot of audience members in my showing were having a great time. They were laughing to all of the jokes. I didn't personally find a lot of the jokes here to be very funny. I think the humor was very much centered around white middle-aged women, which is fine because that was definitely their target audience and that was definitely reflected in the demographic of the audience during my showing. So I have to say that for people who really are huge fans of the show, they probably had a great time with it. For me personally, because I'm not as familiar with the characters, I found it to be a cacophony of all these different characters trying to be serviced at once, and no one was really given enough time or attention to really be fully developed in this film on its own. And so I feel like it's very much a companion piece to the series. But as someone who never watched it, I was never really invested in any of the characters as a result. So I'm going to give Downton Abbey, the movie, a 6 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys what my thoughts were on Downton Abbey, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!